Have you ever noticed how the Romans had an absurd talent for turning simple things into weapons of war? One of the greatest proofs of this is the sling. At first glance, it looks like just a piece of rope with a small bag in the middle. But in the right hands, it became a silent and precise instrument of destruction. This weapon was already used long before Rome dominated the world. Peoples such as the Egyptians, the Assyrians, and others of the Mediterranean already relied on it for both hunting and war. But it was the Romans who took the use of the sling to another level. They didn't just see a rope. They saw a strategic extension of the body, capable of deciding the course of a battle. Just imagine, while an archer was still aiming, the slinger was already spinning his rope in the air and, in a quick movement, launched the projectile more than 400 meters away. That's right, 400 meters, and with enough force to take down an armed soldier. The enemy could hardly see where the attack came from. Wait a minute. Before I continue, I need your help. YouTube only disseminates this video to more people if there is a lot of interaction. In other words, without your comment, this knowledge can be buried and never reach those who need it. If this content makes sense to you, comment 1. If you disagree, comment 0 and tell me why. I want to see at least 100 comments here so that YouTube understands that this subject needs to be spread. Then comment now and be part of this mission to reveal the secrets of ancient Rome. Back to our forgotten weapon. The sling was so effective that many soldiers preferred it to the bow. Lighter, more discreet, and most importantly, surprisingly lethal. And that was just the beginning. The real genius was in the projectiles they used, and that's what we'll talk about next. Now that you understand the power of the sling, you can imagine that the ammunition used with it wasn't just any pebble on the ground, right? The Romans, as always, took everything to another level, and with the sling, it was no different. They turned the choice of the projectile into military science. The slingers could use common stones, yes, but they preferred projectiles molded with strategic shapes. Round, oval, pointed, or teardrop-shaped. Each shape had a different function, from increasing the range to better piercing the flesh or leather of enemies. And there's more. Some projectiles had holes that made a sharp whistle during flight. It was a strange, fast sound that cut through the silence and caused panic even before impact. Others had symbols and messages engraved on them, such as drawings of scorpions, snakes, or provocative short phrases. It was a kind of psychological warfare. The enemy not only felt the physical pain but also the fear of the next stone. And when you combine this emotional charge with the absurd speed that these projectiles reached, it is easy to understand why the sling was so feared. The weight also varied. Some bullets weighed only 50 grams, ideal for quick shots. Others reached 500 grams, and those, my friend, caused serious damage. And the material? It had everything. River stones, baked clay, and most powerful of all, molten lead molded into aerodynamic shape. These were small, heavy, and almost invisible during the flight. When they got it right, it was like taking the impact of an invisible sledgehammer. And the most interesting thing? Even with all this sophistication, the sling still looked like a toy in the hands of those who did not know its true power. But for those who were on the front line, she was the invisible terror that pierced the sky. And here comes the part that most surprises those who think that the sling was just an amateur's weapon, the real impact it caused. Today, with all the modern studies and practical tests done by experts, we know that a simple lead pebble thrown by a trained slinger could have the same impact power as a firearm. To give you an idea, it has already been compared to the damage of a .44 Magnum revolver, one of the most powerful weapons in existence, so strong that many police officers avoided using it because of the violent recoil. Now imagine that, but without noise, without smoke, without attracting attention. A silent, accurate blow flying at more than 100 km/h. It's as if physics were on Rome's side, and it wasn't just about strength, it was also about reach. These bullets could hit targets up to 120 meters away with absurd accuracy, exactly the distance between Roman formations and enemy troops in the open. It was a positioning game. While archers needed line of sight and timing to aim, the slingers launched their ammunition with mobility and agility. They were not there to shoot at random. On the contrary, the slingers moved strategically, passing through the corridors between the infantry lines, throwing their stones above the shields of the allies, making a veritable rain of projectiles on the enemy. It was a support weapon, a lethal cover, and, during sieges of walled cities then, they were the key to hitting defenders on the towers, on the walls, or even inside the city, even before the door opened. What few people realize is that the Romans did not win by force alone. They won because they used each feature as part of a very well thought out system. The sling, although simple, was one of these resources, and when used well, it changed everything. Imagine the following: a fortified city, sky-high walls, archers, positioned up there, defense towers ready, and yet, the Roman slingers were able to cause enormous damage. Why? Because they knew how to use the terrain, the range, and the element of surprise like few others. During the sieges, which were long, tense, and full of strategy, the presence of the slingers was decisive. They positioned themselves on elevated platforms, sometimes on mobile towers or mounds around the city. From there, they launched their projectiles with precision over the walls, hitting defenders, supplies, equipment, and even enemy leaders. Every stone that flew was a chance to destabilize the other side without even opening the gates. And when there were no structures ready, they improvised. They climbed trees, used the relief to their advantage, hid behind rocks. They were masters of ambushes. In the blink of an eye, they appeared through their stones and disappeared into the ground. All very fast, very calculated. It is absolutely effective. At that time, those who mastered the use of the sling were almost like a sniper today. And the most fascinating thing is that, even though it was a long-range weapon, it was also a psychological weapon. The enemy never knew where the next hit would come from. And this kind of constant tension wore down the morale of the troops. During the advance of the Roman legions throughout Europe and North Africa, the slingers were always incorporated as part of the attack, support along with archers and light spearmen. They were not the center of the battle, but they were essential to open the way, break resistances, and destabilize the defenses. A silent but lethal function. And you can't talk about the slingers without mentioning the true masters of the art, the slingers of the Balearic Islands. These men weren't just good, they were legendary. And there's a detail here that makes all the difference. They didn't fight for Rome in the beginning. They were mercenaries, hired by the highest bidder, including Rome's greatest enemies. This is how Hannibal, the great Carthaginian general, met them. Before the Second Punic War, he already knew that he would have to face the brutal power of Rome, and so he recruited at least 10,000 Balearic slingers for his army. And why just them? Because these men grew up training with the sling since they were children, literally. In some regions of the islands, they could only eat if they hit the target with the sling. It was culture, it was survival, it was discipline. These mercenaries became key players in Hannibal's strategies. They did not directly confront the legionnaires. That was not their function. The role was to destabilize the countryside before the fighting even began. Quick attacks, ambushes, harassment from a distance. They broke formations, confused soldiers, and created breaches. With this, Hannibal gained the upper hand, and we know that he won several historical battles using this type of tactical intelligence. Later, even the Roman army itself surrendered to the talent of these men. They became part of the auxiliary corps of the Roman legions, along with archers from the island of Crete and knights from Numidia. And this trio, slingers, archers, and light cavalry, became one of Rome's great tactical differentials in open warfare, especially until the 2nd century AD. These men did not wear shining armor, nor did they parade in glory, but without them, many Roman victories might never have happened. If this content is making sense to you so far, do this. Give me a sign. Comment 1 below so I know you're with me on this journey. And remember, YouTube only spreads this knowledge if it has a lot of interaction. If you haven't commented yet, now is the time. I want to see this video full of opinions so that this topic continues to reach more people. Now pay attention to this. The slingers have not disappeared over time. On the contrary, they were recorded on Roman monuments, such as Trajan's Column, one of the most important works of ancient Rome. erected to celebrate the emperor's victories in the wars against the Dacians. If the sculptors decided to immortalize the slingers in that work, it's because their role was much more relevant than many people imagine. The column shows detailed scenes of military campaigns, and there they are, launching projectiles, with a technical posture, from the top of platforms alongside other elite soldiers. This shows that Imperial Rome not only recognized the value of these men, but also saw them as an integral part of the machinery of war. And the recognition was not only in art. One of the most respected military authors of the time, Vegetius, wrote about the Balearic slingers with admiration. He advocated that all Roman recruits should learn to use the sling, not as an option, but as an essential skill for any soldier. And look at the curious detail. In the Balearic Islands, children were trained from an early age to hit targets before eating. This was not just discipline, it was military doctrine. According to Vegetius, even soldiers wearing armor were vulnerable to projectiles from the sling. The rounded lead stones with absurd weight and speed could break shields, pierce protections, and even hit vital organs depending on the impact. He even said that these stones were more dangerous than arrows, especially in mountainous, stony terrain or in attacks against walls. In other words, it wasn't just about shooting from afar. It was about changing the balance of battle with an invisible weapon. And now the question that does not want to be silenced: why did such an efficient, strategic weapon end up being forgotten over time? The answer is simple, and at the same time frightening. Because she was too simple. The sling did not have the grandeur of a sword, nor the visual impact of a catapult. It was discreet, silent, but extremely lethal. And that is precisely why many historians have ended up ignoring his role over the centuries. But on the battlefield, it wasn't appearance that counted. It was a result. And in this, the sling gave everything. Imagine a group of Roman soldiers surrounding a city. While engineers set up siege towers and legionnaires erected shields, the slingers were already in position, on hills, on wooden platforms, often hidden in the terrain. They started the attack long before the direct confrontation, and with that, they set the stage for the rest of the troop to advance. During the Roman civil wars and also in the expansion campaigns, the slingers continued to be used as specialized support troops. They were part of the so-called auxiliary units, soldiers, who were not Roman citizens but fought alongside the empire with strategic roles. And these roles, even though they were behind the scenes of the war, were fundamental to the success of the legions. Rome understood early on something that many modern armies did not realize until centuries later. Victory does not always come from those on the front line. Sometimes it starts with a projectile that no one sees coming. Have you ever noticed that in Rome, nothing was by chance? Each army unit, each type of soldier, each weapon, everything had a specific function within. A system thought out to the smallest detail, and the slingers fit into this system as precision pieces. They were used intelligently, especially in hard-to-reach terrain. When the battlefield was uneven, littered with rocks, unevenness, forests, or valleys, archers had difficulty operating efficiently. As for the slingers, these adapted easily. They could hide, move fast, and use their surroundings to their advantage. During attacks on fortresses, for example, the Romans knew that hand-to-hand confrontation was risky, but the slingers could fight their way from a distance, hitting enemies in the towers, destroying supplies, breaking the morale of the defenses before the clash even began. What's more, they saved resources because they didn't require arrows or complex equipment. All it took was a good sling and the right projectile. For this reason, many generals considered this weapon an invisible trump card. It didn't attract attention, but it was decisive. Victory didn't depend on brute force alone, it depended on knowing when, where, and how to strike. And in this, the slingers were specialists. They were the watchful eyes on the hills, the first to cast and the last to be seen. Rome knew this, and so it kept them in its system of warfare for centuries. Over time, the name slinger ceased to be just a military function and became almost an elite brand within Rome's auxiliary troops. Not just anyone occupied this position. The Romans valued this skill so much that, in the legions, experienced slingers received differentiated treatment, often being recognized as soldiers of high tactical value. They played alongside two other, equally strategic groups, the Cretan archers, famous for their accuracy, and the Numidian light cavalry, feared for their speed and mobility. Together, these three groups formed a type of special force, a mobile, versatile unit designed to destabilize the enemy before direct contact took place. The function of these assistants was clear: to weaken the adversary, and not just physically. They broke the enemy's trust. Imagine you in formation with shield and helmet waiting for the Roman line to advance, and suddenly a rain of stones starts out of nowhere. With each impact, more confusion, more chaos. Wounded soldiers before, they even saw the enemy's face. That's why fear was spreading even before the legions appeared. Just the rumor that there were Balearic slingers in the army was enough to make opponents alert, or even hesitant. They knew what lay ahead: invisible, accurate stones, and pain that came before the sword. Rome didn't need to shout to win. Sometimes, the deathly silence of a sling spinning in the air was enough. In the end, what the sling teaches us is simple. Not everything that seems fragile is weak. And not every weapon needs to be huge, noisy, or made of shiny iron to change the course of history. This little rope and stone weapon has been forgotten by many, but remembered by those who understand the true power of strategy. Rome knew this. That's why he trained entire generations of soldiers with it, perfected his technique, and relied on slingers to win battles that couldn't always be won with sword and shield. It is amazing how something so simple can be so decisive. The sling became a symbol of tactical intelligence, precision, and efficiency, and perhaps above all, it reminds us that those who underestimate the detail miss the whole. If you like this content, leave your like now, because it shows YouTube that it's worth spreading videos like this to more people, and it doesn't come out yet. The next video is already appearing on the screen. Click now and continue with us on this journey through what history almost erased. See you in the next video.